I am very pleased to be here to share a topic that I have a big passion for. And I suppose my passion came from the point of view of being an athlete, coaching athletes, and then becoming injured myself, and seeing some of the devastation that can come from becoming injured, particularly for someone who is a high-level sport or athlete. When you take a look at my background, yes, I did coach here for a number of years, for about 8 years in women's basketball. And then I went back to school and did a PhD in sports psychology and sports medicine. And I became a certified athletic therapist. And to me, that's a perfect marriage of two different areas. Because when we work as athletic therapists, we put our hands on people to help them. There's an automatic opening or line of communication that starts, and that gives us a chance then to work with that person on any psychological or emotional problems that they might be having. So that's the direction that I'm coming from. You're going to see a few different athletes. I'm not implying by showing their pictures that they've received these injuries, but they were good examples for us to have today. And this statement, I think probably everyone will agree with, that athletic injury not only threatens the physical aspect or the physical well-being, but it impinges on that athlete's self-concept, the belief systems, their social and sometimes their occupational functioning, sometimes their values, their commitments, and sometimes also their emotional equilibrium. I had one young athlete, a basketball player here, and he tore his anterior cruciate ligament. That's the one where the media always says he blew out his knee. Now, can you imagine that in your mind, a knee blowing out? That doesn't happen. And it's a terrible, terrible graphic to use with a young person who's just hurt a knee. So I always say to people, try not to use that term, because it's something that can even make the person more depressed than they may already be. But he said to me, I came to York University to play basketball and to get some education. He was honest. But he also said, now that I don't have basketball, who am I? Because he had been playing basketball since he was 8 or 9 years old. That was going to be his career. And as far as he could see, at this point, his career was finished. Now, we have to work to turn around that kind of thinking, but that was his thought at the time. So as you can see, yes, there's a physical aspect to all injury. There's no doubt about that. But the toll on the emotional well-being is something that is quite critical. I think this statement, to me, says more than anything. The fact that the injury has occurred is less important than its meaningfulness. So you look at this athlete here. She's at the Olympics. This is London 2012. And she has fallen, maybe in an event that she has trained for 4, 8, 12 years of her life. She's at the pinnacle experience, and she falls. So can you imagine then doing all of that training and this huge impact of not being able to finish what your goal has been for all of those years? So it's the meaningfulness that I think is most important. And I think as we go through here, you'll see that as well. Unfortunately, where are we with research? Well, there aren't any definitive answers from research about the psychological implications of sport injury. We just don't have a good handle on what's happening. I think the best example of that right now are concussions. And we've all seen in the media about concussions. We'll talk a little bit about that a bit later on and why it can be such a devastating injury. But unfortunately, at this point, research hasn't gone far enough into what's happening with the psychological aspects of physical injury. Why is that? Well, it's what's called multifactorial. And anytime you see multifactorial, it means we don't have any idea which it is. So we've got an injured athlete. What are the sport influences? Well, that could be the coach. I worked with one coach once who said to an injured athlete, Oh, you're hurt. Well, go and get rehabbed, and when you're finished, come back and see me. Now, what he was saying was, you're of no use to me right now. I need players who can play. You go and get rehabbed, whatever that meant, and then I'll be interested in you again. So there are huge sport influences. On the Blue Jays game last night, which they won, there was a comment made that one of the players had been playing with an injured thumb for a long period of time, and he didn't want to come out of the lineup because somebody else would take his spot and he may never get back into the bigs again. He may never play again in the bigs. So they play hurt. Now, that not only sets an example for younger athletes, but it's the norm in a lot of sport. So that's something that we have to deal with all the time. Injury influences. Now, this is something that's very interesting. I'm a Toronto Maple Leaf fan. I know. Sorry about that, but I am. There is some research that shows that more athletes will report an injury during a lost game than a winning game. So did you notice how many players last year were injured for the Leafs? They were all injured at one time or another. But it is a fact. After a game has been lost, injured athletes will come to you more readily than they would if the game was won. Maybe they're off having a brew, and enjoying the win, I'm not sure, but maybe it's also the depression of the loss. So they look at that and say, oh, we lost, and I'm hurt. I'm going to go and see the therapist.
The endorphins kick in.
That could be as well. That's a factor that we'll talk about a little bit later on because it's very, very important when an athlete will report an injury, because they may not even know they're injured because of the endorphins. We look at personal influences. What if this young athlete who's injured is in the senior year, the last year of university? Compare that with somebody who's in the first year of university. The first year one, that athlete has a chance to play 3 or 4 more years because I'm hurt, but that's okay, I've got my whole career ahead of me. The senior athlete, my career's over. This is the last I'll ever play a game, and now I'm hurt. So there's more meaningfulness to that injury than to that first-year player. And look at the social influences. It's very, very interesting. What we see happening is the person becomes the injury. So for example, when you go and talk with somebody and they've had a good game, you look them straight in the face and you say, hey, that was a fabulous game you played this weekend. Wow, great game. What happens when they're injured? Hi, I saw your game. Oh, I saw that you hurt your knee. Wow, that knee really looks swollen. It must hurt a lot. Now you notice all my attention went to the knee. I no longer had eye contact with that person. I went to the knee because that person becomes that injury. And that's how we relate to them often. So yes, it's multifactorial. Now my perfect research, not that we could ever do it, but I wanted to try it, was to combine the physical aspect, physiology, and the psychological aspect. So when an athlete goes down on the football field, we run out there, we give them a survey to fill out. How do you feel? Give me your feelings right now. Yeah, unfortunately, most of the words that they used aren't on the survey. The other thing is to get a blood test to see physiologically what's happening. Then they're not really willing to give any more blood than they already have. So it's difficult in research to do. So when we talk about the psychological factors in sport injury recovery, what we should be doing is listening to what the athlete is saying and not saying. Sometimes they won't tell you things, they'll tell you other things that they may think you want to hear, but they may not tell you all the details. So you have to listen to what's not being said as well. Listen behind or in between the lines. Look for changes in behavior. Quite often someone who's injured doesn't want to relate to all the friends that they've had before because they want to have some alone time. So you need to watch for some of the behavior that might change. we need to be open to seeking help. Not just that injured athlete, but it may be the family or the coaches or the teammates who also need some help in knowing how to deal with this injury, particularly if it's a catastrophic injury. We need to recognize the long-term effects of injury. Most of us who played sport and with reckless abandon, we became hurt and we did the same things. We kept playing when we were hurt. And how many of us now have arthritis? Yeah, look at it around the room. So at the time when somebody would say to you, you know, if you don't stop playing or you don't modify your playing or you don't rehab completely, you may have arthritis when you're 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. Didn't mean anything to us. We know from research that that kind of warning doesn't have any effect. It's like the old smoking research that they did. You know, if you smoke, your lungs will look like this. Well, it doesn't affect us, because most of the time we look and we say, well, that won't happen to me. It happens to others, but it won't happen to me. And so now we struggle with arthritis down the road. Now, most of you have also seen in the media the number of former NFL football players and CFL, hockey players who are suing because of the number of concussions that they were allowed to play with and the subsequent mental and cognitive problems that they are now having. Even just getting through daily life, there are significant sequelae or things that have followed them throughout their life because of those injuries. So we need to recognize that there are long-term effects to injuries. And we need to look at the whole package, not just when will I play again, but what about getting back to school, getting back to a job, getting back to relationships, meaningful relationships. All of those may have been changed because of this injury. So again, multifactorial. So what should we consider? Well, the individuality of each athlete, because each athlete makes a certain percentage of commitment to the sport. The athlete who said, what am I if I'm not a basketball player? Obviously had made a huge commitment to that sport. What about the one who says, well, I just enjoy playing, and I don't have to play every day. I can play once a month, and that's good enough for me. That person's going to react differently to an injury than the one who has to play every day just to feel good about himself. The situation that caused the injury, and this is a very interesting one. You will hear during hockey games particularly, somebody will get hit, schmucked up against the boards, and the commentator will say, well, I bet they've got his number. So they looked around and said, who hit me? Okay, it was 15. Next game, I'm going to return the favor. So the situation that caused the injury, did an opponent hit you? Or were you just running and you stepped in a pothole and broke your leg? Who are you angry at now? You can't be angry at an opponent because nobody hit you. So, you sue, that's right. So we can see that the injury situation, what caused it, can cause big changes in how you react. And what's norm for the athlete? This we'll take a look at shortly, and I think this is a critical aspect of how we work with injured athlete. How important is sport to that injured athlete's life? I can give it or take it, doesn't matter. Or I have to participate every day. And the etiology of the injury, the mechanism. This, I think, is another key. So let's look at that. And these are two terms that you don't hear very often, macrotraumatic injury or microtraumatic injury. The macrotraumatic injury is the one hit. So somebody tackled you and your leg was broken. That's the macrotraumatic injury, one instance that caused your injury. The microtraumatic injury, on the other hand, is sometimes called overuse, and that's running 15 kilometers a day and your feet start to hurt, but you keep running. That's the overuse, the microtrauma. This is macrotraumatic injury. Very easy to see that. Do you know what event this is? Sort of a hurdles, steeplechase. And I said steeplechase to my students the other day, athletic therapy students, and they said, huh? Is that with horses? Is that with horses? And I said, no, humans. But you notice the hurdle is solid. It's not one of the small ones that if you hit it, it goes over. These ones are very solid, and you don't hurdle them typically. You jump 1 foot up onto the top and then you leap over. And so you'll see it actually right here on the campus this summer with the Pan Am Games. So this is very, very solid. So this poor gentleman here, yeah, that's a macrotraumatic injury. So, psychologically, what can happen? Well, it's a single traumatic event. There sometimes is an opportunity to release anger in this situation because it's just happened and all kinds of language can come out. You can be angry at yourself, you can be angry at the world, but bingo, it's just happened. So there can be a cathartic effect. Participation in most cases immediately ceases. Now, some players, as we know, are hurt and they go back into play, but that's a different situation. And most often, we can estimate when that person will come back to play again. Because we know that a broken arm takes approximately 6 weeks to heal. Then we do the rehabilitation to make sure that they are game fit. They can go back and play. So that's an important thing because we can say to that athlete, okay, this competition you're going to miss, but this one here, let's use that as a target and we'll work towards that because it's long enough away that we can get you healthy again and get you competing. That's important to athletes. Research in this area, this is where most of the research is done because it's easy. Somebody gets hurt, they come in to see you, you do your research. It's an easy way of being able to get information on reactions. Here's microtrauma. Microtrauma. So look at the shoulders of this athlete, and she's pushing this wheelchair repeated times, repeated times, repeated times. The stress on the shoulders is tremendous. It's huge. Now she's got the Pan Am Games coming up. So she's going to train even a little bit harder. But, you know, there's a little bit of a hurt right there. But, you know, I got to go to the games. I've got to be the fastest. So I'll work through it. Well, you keep working through it and it gets worse. So, microtrauma. The injury has been building up for some time. There isn't a specific onset. You can't say, that's when it happened. That's when I hurt myself. So it's been building up for a long period of time. But because of pain, often what happens is your performance declines. What does that make an athlete do? Train harder. Train harder. Which makes the situation worse. And we all do it, all the time. There isn't a cathartic event that I can get angry at. I knew I shouldn't have done that. Because it's been building up for a long period of time. And here's the most difficult part. There isn't a set definitive date when I can say to that athlete, you'll be ready to go in 6 weeks. Because it's taken probably months for that injury to build up. How long is it going to take now for the recovery? We often don't know. Very, very difficult for that athlete. Athletes are goal-oriented. So I need to know that I'm going to be competing in this event. Well, I can tell you that you'll be ready. But I have to. So there's a lot that's at stake with this kind of injury. Often we see setbacks in this kind of injury as well because people come back too soon. Oh, I feel really good. I'm going to go out for a workout. And oh, it feels great. I'm going to push it a little bit further. You're hurt again. So we see this very often. This is Yeah, I like the graphic on the left, so. With little kids, you know, they had to put in rules in Little League Baseball that pitchers could only pitch a certain number of innings because coaches were likely to leave them in too long because they were a very good pitcher. And then they ended up with shoulder and elbow problems. They also had to limit the number of curveballs that were thrown because that puts a lot of torque on the elbow. And that had to be mandated because we adults couldn't control ourselves in leaving those really good pitchers in the game. So, look at this athlete here. Now you talk about microtrauma. How many millions of steps did he take on what we would now consider to be garbage that he was running on? I would say garbage, but pieces of sticks and leather, wood and leather. What they run on now is incredible. It's a laminate, it has spring to it, it's cushioned. He ran all of those steps. How many of us in here have run a marathon?
Does 10K count?
10K is pretty good. It's pretty good. You're a quarter of the way. He did that every day for 143 days. A day. Most marathoners will run 2 or 3 at max in a year because of the toll on the body. He did that. Now, he didn't do it in, 2.5 hours. He took a whole day to do it. But he did it for 143 days on one leg, taking double steps with the left one and a hop on the right. That's microtrauma. That's overuse. That's tremendous strain on the body. He's my hero, by the way. Where's the research on this? Virtually none. And yet, to me, this is much harder than the macrotrauma. The macrotrauma, you're angry, you get over it, and then you start working to get ready again. The microtrauma can go on for months and months and months, and there's virtually no research. It's an area that we desperately need to have more research. So, summary of those two. The potential for depression due to the loss of participation is quite high in both, but it's higher in the microtrauma. We know times for recovery with macrotrauma. We don't with microtrauma. Less number of setbacks in the rehabilitation with macrotrauma. And we can probably blame somebody with the macrotrauma we can't accept ourselves with the microtrauma. So, more recently, another injury has come into play. The head injury in sport. This is from MMA, as you can see. So, quite significant hematoma here. Obviously, something's happening around this eye. The main thing, however, is how much trauma has there been to his brain. We have sports where the goal of the sport is to rattle somebody else's brain around so hard in the cranium that they can't function, right? That's the goal, right? Hit them hard enough in the head. Then they can't hit you as hard in the head, and then you win, right? Now, let's imagine this. You're doing dissections of brains after somebody has passed away. You have a brain in your hand. It's quite solid. And you can do the dissection of that. However, when a person is alive, if you imagine a bowl of Jell-O, a solid bowl of Jell-O you've just taken out of the fridge and you do this to it, that's what the consistency of your brain is. So now imagine that and somebody hitting it and that Jell-O banging around in your brain. So we're now becoming more aware that the head injury is something that's quite significant. We've known about the vascular injuries on the left. We've talked about those for many years. These are the hematomas where some athletes have died. We know that that can happen in sport, unfortunately. Right now, what's happening is that every injury is being called a concussion, and that's not accurate. These are vascular injuries. These are neurological injuries. Most often now the term concussion is being used, or, even more frightening, mild traumatic brain injury.
Okay, so just a question.
Yep.
Isn't it better to assume you have a concussion? I'll relate to my own experience. I played varsity football for York in the 70s. First play of the game, I went to block somebody, I jumped, his knee hit me in the side of the head, and I dropped like a ton of bricks.
Yep.
I felt like I was somewhere between heaven and earth. You literally see stars.
Yes.
So when they came out to get me, and I started to walk off the field, I was seeing very many things that usually stay in one place. And when I got to the sideline, what the trainer did, and I won't say which trainer it was, he gave me one of
Sorry,
these.
I knew.
And then went, how many fingers? And I said, which one? He said, the one in the middle. I said, 2. So
You're okay.
we're okay, right?
Yep.
So, I often wonder if the reason why I ended up the way I ended up was because of that play. So I think, it's important, to make the assumption that the worst has happened,
Yes.
right? Rather than just saying that not everything is not a concussion. You assume that it is a concussion.
Yeah, you can take that approach, yes. But I agree with you 100% that what we do now in evaluating an injured athlete for concussion compared to what was done in the 70s is night and day. Absolute night and day. As long as you came over to the right sideline, you were okay.
I could have been in the washroom all night.
Some athletes don't know that they're even concussed. Teammates, hey, are you okay? Coach, something's wrong here. Sometimes that's what happens. So we know so much more now, but we've gone from this bit of information, knowledge, to this amount. We need to know this amount. And so we should be frightened by this. Not frightened so that we avoid all sport or contact sport or anything like this, but frightened that we take precautions and we question, are you sure you're ready to go back? Let's make sure, because you know what athletes will do? If you ask an athlete, can you play? What are they going to say? Okay, coach. Yeah, I can go, coach. Yep. And I was a coach. But I can say this. I can be critical of coaches because coaches will say, well, she said she was okay. Because you knew that she would say that. That's why you asked her.
Right, and just an adjunct. I won't say which coach, but I heard from one of my teammates that one of the coaches, who I didn't necessarily get along with, said, leave him out there, he's tough, he can get up on his own. Then he said, it doesn't matter. If he doesn't get up or not, it never works anyway. He's a lazy slob. He didn't say slob, but
Yeah.
words. I won't read it.
Oh, or don't be a girl. Don't say that around me. Don't be a sissy. If you remember the Toronto Maple Leafs in the 80s, I guess it was, or 90s perhaps, Wendell Clark, he had a lot of back issues, and these were legitimate. They called him Wendy. So you can see the biases that we have in sport. And concussion, unfortunately, has fallen into this. It's just a ding. It's just a ding. Oh, got his bell rung.
Yeah, when you look back and you see Bobby Bond in the 60s playing with a broken leg because they pumped him up with cocaine or whatever. No,
Yeah, Novocaine or...
He's always held out as the man.
Oh, yes.
For Toronto Maple Leafs because he played with a broken leg.
Yeah, now in the comparison between those two, I would go with Bobby Bond all the time. Because that's a broken leg. Yeah, he's going to have arthritis. Big deal. It's a long way from his brain. This is supposed to control our actions in life. Unfortunately, for the male sports, this controls a lot of the actions in life. How many years did it take the NHL to mandate that men had to wear helmets? Okay, would they have gone out there without a cup?
No.
Oh, no. But they'll go out without a helmet. So you can see the sport influences, we're fighting against the sport influences of old. Are you hurt or are you injured? And if you're just hurt, you can play. If you're injured, you can't. And this is, again, the semantics that coaches would use. That's rubbish.
But things have changed over time. I mean, the
Yeah.
bomb example is one, obviously. But, I mean, I remember a situation where Alex Del Vecchio got cut over the eye. The blood was dripping so much he couldn't see. They said he needs stitches. He got a Band-Aid put on, so they wait until in between periods to put the stitches on.
Yes.
Stitches. You don't see that kind of thing anymore.
No, not as much. Although we did have Sundin, who had a horrible injury. Salming's was even worse. Salming had 2 major injuries that just missed his eyeball by the narrowest of margins. But Sundin had this horrible scar. He came back and played. He didn't miss a game. He put a face mask, a half mask on and continued playing, but he wasn't scoring. So what did he do? Well, he took the face mask off because it was stopping him from scoring. So, you know, we look at these decisions that are made and we say, gosh, you know, we have to be protecting athletes a little bit better. What's the difference between a musculoskeletal, like I made that example of the broken leg or the concussion, what's the difference between the musculoskeletal injury and the sport concussion? We can see that the leg's broken, so it's okay, you can sit down because obviously you're pretty tough. You were trying to play with a broken leg. Can we see the concussion? No, we can't. Well, I wonder about his work ethic.
Sorry, I have to interject here. You just made a comment, we have to protect our athletes more. What about the athletes protecting themselves more? I mean, you look at a worker, you look at a union worker, one little thing, they think that something wrong is gonna happen. Oh, nope, gotta stop work. So why are, like, I understand we have to protect the injured, but how about ourselves? Like, why not have more value? Why don't we teach people to have more value rather than...
I think that's a perfect place to start. What is invested for that person who's a worker? Oh, I don't want to get hurt. That's an income, right? What's invested for that athlete? An Olympic medal? Stanley Cup?
Income as well.
Income as well, absolutely. So I think we need to change the mentality of that sport. But you'll see here another athlete who broke her nose in a game and wouldn't come out. Now, whose decision is that? But anyway, she wouldn't come out, and she scored right after she went back in and played. So there's a reinforcement of her continuing to play hurt. So we'll see her in a couple of minutes, but this is where we start to doubt people. It's not a visible injury. Their eyes aren't going around like this. So you're probably okay. Just shake it off. You'll be all right.
If you're gonna, it's all you're talking. Basically, it's social. It's social pressures. We're social animals.
Yeah.
So whether it's the player or it's the society at large and how it looks at it, and it seems to me the only thing you've got to do, the first thing you've got to do is a lot of research and then mandate it. I mean, there were a lot of workers who used to go back.
Yep.
Until it became illegal, they couldn't do it.
That's right.
So it's basically what we have to do. Then we change over time. We change the societal pressures.
I agree with you 100%. There are some ways, however, that athletes get around that. We mandated helmets. We didn't mandate that they had to wear the liners in the helmets. So Gretzky, then this came out, the athletic therapist for the Toronto Maple Leafs received the helmets and gave them all out to the players. And a week later, a box came and there was a note from the manufacturer and they said, sorry, we forgot to include the liners in the helmets when we sent you the helmets. So he called the players over and he said, oh, here's the liners for your helmets. Oh, we don't want them. Well, why not? Well, it makes it too snug. I don't want it snug. So they interviewed Gretzky. And they said, Gretzky, do you wear a liner in your helmet? Well, no, I don't. But I'm a professional, you see, so I know what I'm doing. But you kids, you have to put the liner in your helmet. You really have to. And I thought, I like Gretzky. I think he's a great player. But what a stupid thing to say. Because everyone's following what he does. There's the society. So a week later, he got a concussion. And I thought, however, now, recovering for this athlete, what can we do? Well, we've got stages of healing. We know that there are stages that an athlete will go through physiologically to heal a broken bone. We know that. So we can do goal setting. By this time next week, we'll have all the swelling down and all the redness and the heat. And this is how we're going to do it. So the athlete has a chance to look ahead and say, okay, so next week I know what my knee will look like. We don't know if the brain will even heal. We know there is some healing that takes place, but how much damage do we have to see before that? We can't do any goal setting. We can work on other physical skills. If my leg is broken, I can get on a bike ergometer and work. I can do shooting. I can do all those things. What do we suggest for concussions? Rest in a dark room. No television, no computers, no phones, no school, a dark room. Wow, that's tough. Even to do that for an hour, most people can't do it. Imagine doing that for several days. Rehab, we can design it. We don't know how to rehab somebody typically right now because we don't know what phase of healing their brain is in. Oftentimes it's not necessarily rehabilitation.
How would the injury for the brain on a concussion look like? Is it bruised? Is it...
That's a key question. The typical thing for an injury is you go in and you get an x-ray. Doesn't show anything, because that's only going to show bony. So then for head injuries, a CT scan is the gold standard. What does it show with a concussion? Nothing. So you can have an x-ray, you can have a CT scan, and it will not show. The only thing that starts to show is functional MRI. An MRI where you put them into the MRI machine and you have them do certain things, and you see if they can achieve them, and if the part of the brain that's supposed to work is actually working. But can we do that for all athletes who might have a concussion? So it's very, very difficult. And this is one of the problems. How do we diagnose the concussion? Ones that are really severe are easy. Ones that aren't really severe are a problem. And here's the other problem as well. Often with a concussion, if I get hit right now, my symptoms might not start showing up until tomorrow. So they come over and they check me. Can you walk a line? Can you do this? Can you do all of those things? Yeah, I'm fine. I can play coach. And tomorrow, I don't want to open my eyes because the lights are bothering me. And I've got headaches. So it's very, very difficult to know what to do. So let's take a look and see some athletes. Here's an elite level Canadian basketball player. Had a major knee injury, had a reconstruction, went back to play, tore the same knee again, went back to play, had damage to that knee again. And what she said was, I couldn't believe that it was my own body letting me down. That's interesting, isn't it? Very interesting to say that. It's like separating yourself from your body. And we're one. We're not separate, like we have a brain and we have a body. We're one. Let's see another one. Football player, he dipped his head and tackled, so with the top of the head, and that's the prime mechanism for spinal cord injury, which is what he had. My body had never been a barrier to me before. Again, very interesting. It wasn't a lack of effort holding me back. It was just that my body was simply not doing what I was willing it to do. That was frustrating, drove me crazy. My body had never been a barrier. So here he went from an NFL player, a very, very good player, to someone who could do this and a little bit of this, and that was it. Now he's done very well, and he's walking and he talks and conducts himself now with major response to that injury, but he was lucky. Same thing though, separating himself from his body. Here's the before and after, and this is what I think part of the take-home message has to be if someone's injured. What was life like for that athlete prior to the injury? And then let's see what life is like for them after the injury. So here's another Canadian athlete, and you'll notice that silver medal at the Olympics, the Beijing Olympics, around his neck, former York student. You describe him before his injury, literally on top of the world, achieving goals that he'd set out for himself, hard work paying off, respected for his courage. He has the highest jumps in the world off the trampoline, the highest in the world. He's dominant. So, okay. Now people see the injury, not the athlete. Now he's working back and we're hoping that he's ready to go for Pan Ams. So we should see him competing again. But how do you go from being totally dominant, independent, now he's in a wheelchair. How does he get himself around? How does he get a meal? How does he go to the bathroom? Look at the change. His goals are suspended. He's now working on recovery, not high performance. So totally different from what life before the injury and life after the injury. So here's the impact on that athlete. Here's another athlete, former York athlete, fit, on top of the world again, in control, dominant, independent. That's what part of sport is. Now he's sitting listening to therapists discussing the rehabilitation of his knee. Now this is a different athlete, but because I didn't want to use the same one getting his rehab. What's BMOC?
Big man on campus.
Big man on campus, an American term, but he's no longer the big man on campus. He's now the hurt man on campus. Fitness disappears. Gosh, you've worked for ages to get fit, and now that's pretty well gone. Has pain with almost every workout, and recovery seems far away. Look at the change from before the injury to after the injury. This is a fabulous one. Canadian, Olympic gold medalist in gymnastics, the first for Canada. On top of the world, exquisite body control in gymnastics, cheered by everyone. Again, dominant, independent. Now what he did, I don't know if you can see this, it's hard to see. There's one leg and it's in a brace. There's the other leg and it's in a brace, and he's in a wheelchair. He either under-rotated or over-rotated on a dismount from a vault, and he broke both legs, tibial plateau. And tibial plateau is not a good fracture, so he broke both of them. So he goes from Olympic gold medalist to someone in a wheelchair who now has both legs stuck out straight in front of him while they heal, and had to have surgery on both. Incredible change. Future in sport in doubt. Yeah, it did hurt. Yeah. So look at the change in life. How do we not expect to have psychological and emotional changes? Now this is, I'm not implying that anyone had a concussion, but successful, respected by all, dominant, achieves her goals. After an injury occurs, we must accept the consequences of those injuries. And it's the athletes and their parents and support group who have to accept the consequences. So what are the athletes telling us? Well, they lose control of their lives after an injury. They can't drive a car potentially, they may not be able to make their own meals. All of these kinds of things change their lives. When they're normally being physically active, like training, they're sitting watching TV. I love this one. This young woman here is Erin Brooks. She was the first female head athletic therapist of a professional football team in North America. And she's a York alumna, and working with the Argonauts football team. And you look at her body language, looking up at this particular football player, and she was telling him he was not going back into play. So, athletes don't want to hear that tough news. He wanted to put the brace back on his knee, right here. He wanted to put the brace back on and go back in and play. And she was telling him, in no uncertain terms, you're not going back in. So, what should we consider? The individuality of that athlete, some of the situational factors, and the importance of sport to that athlete. Maybe you're a weekend warrior, but that means something to you to be able to go every weekend and play 18 holes and walk 18 holes of the golf course. It means something to you, and now you can't do it. So we need to respect that. What's normal for that athlete? We have to understand that as well. And what's the etiology of the injury? Here's the key. Some athletes will continue to play. Here she's playing, and Christine Sinclair to me is one of the best players that she is one of the best players in the world, and Canadian, and scoring 3 goals in the Olympics, in winning that. I mean, that was just, it was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And this is when she played with the broken nose in the next game. But someone needs to be the voice of reason, because 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road, what are going to be the consequences of making the decision to continue playing? So who's the voice of reason? Well, to me, it's the athletic therapist. I'm biased. I'm an athletic therapist. I've been a coach. Maybe my coaching job's on the line if we don't win. So am I biased? Yeah, I want to see that player play. As an athletic therapist, my job should not be on the line whether a player plays or not. Sometimes they are. Now that's sort of the final aspect of things. I've got a few bits of things that you might want to look for some references. There's my tweet handle. Yes, I do tweet, much to my students' surprise. Here's an Association for Applied Sports Psychology, and they do have a section on there for injury where you can ask questions. And in here is a consensus statement that came out of Zurich in 2012, and it talks about the sort of worldwide approach to concussions. And there are a lot of things, very good things that are answered, questions that are answered in there.